Hello my friends, welcome back to Pantry Preparedness. It is a very warm morning here in Meridian, Idaho. Today we're talking a bit about the garden. You see, because something is going on. Well, let me just show you. We have some garden beds that are growing things just fine. I mean, look here at these onions. The peppers over there are growing awfully slow, but the tomatoes in their pots are fine. This bed of sunflowers is fine. Not fine. It took a while, but these pumpkins have finally started going. Even these carrots are not loving life too much. This whole bed is supposed to be full of different kinds of lettuce, but more than half of it's not working very well. But all these flowers over here, they're not flowering yet, but they're doing okay. We've got some mint there in the back, and again, some squash that has taken a long time to take off. So what is going on? It's July. Normally our garden would be very green by now. I have a few hypotheses I want to test, and that's what we're going to do in this video. Mostly we're going to focus on the one that I'm pretty sure is what it is. And so we'll get to that one here in just a second. We'll talk a little bit about basically how our plants are being poisoned, but then we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to do about it. But first I want to talk through some other possibilities. The first one is the watering. If I'm overwatering or underwatering a particular garden bed, that could be an issue. That said, these two garden beds were planted with the exact same seeds from the same packets. There was a mix of sunflowers and things. Actually, I think it was a bunch of varieties of sunflowers. And then here we've got some sweet pea, just the flowering ones, not so much looking for the peas here. So these are just flowers. And the sunflowers are awesome. We can give them to our chickens, actually as food, which is pretty cool. Same seeds, same watering. I've got the same little sprinkler thing down here that I have down here, and I've been following it, and they're exactly the same. So I don't think it's that it's being over or under watered, because the watering is the same and it's automated. So what could it be if it's not the watering? Well, my next hypothesis is the weather this year. I don't remember in my life ever having a year quite like this year. See, what happened is we had a winter that extended for a long time, but that was pretty mild. So the spring started off pretty cold, so things kind of got a slow start, but it wasn't freezing. So we planted seeds when we normally do because it wasn't freezing anymore, but it wasn't heating up the way that we're used to. And then that lasted a long time. We had a few kind of hot days here and there, but even over the 4th of July, it was only like 90 degrees outside, which we're used to it being in the upper 90s, sometimes even triple digits around the 4th of July. Now, that was last week. This week, it's already started. For the next 10 days, in the 10-day forecast, every single day is supposed to be in the triple digits. Literally, it has never happened in recorded history in Idaho. We've never had more than 9 days in a row in the triple digits. We're gonna have multiple days this week where the high is supposed to be around 109 to 110 degrees Fahrenheit, which is crazy for here. So, could it just be these big temperature swings? Again, I think that hypothesis is debunked right now because first of all, some of our plants are doing fine, but second of all, we have plants that aren't doing well here that are doing just fine over at my parents' house. I showed you that the pumpkins here, I said they took a long time to take off. The pumpkins we planted over here at my parents' house, look at these. These pumpkins, these tomatoes, even the beans and peas are doing a lot better over here than they're doing over at my place. Now we do always have a little bit of trouble in this garden because we have a lot of shade. We have this willow tree here from the neighbors. We have our willow tree here. Granted, our willow tree lost half of its shade this year, so it's not quite as shady. But our garden space doesn't get as much sun as we'd like. It's one of the reasons why we plant so much over at my parents' place. But still, we usually get a lot more than what we're getting here, which leads me to my third hypothesis. And that is, I believe that we have had our soil poisoned. Now there's an herbicide, and a lot of people have been talking about this in our area in local Facebook gardening groups, an herbicide called Grazon. It's from a family of, actually the whole family is a problem for us gardeners. They're aminopyralids. It's a big word. I used to be a chemical engineer, so it's a little easier for me to remember chemistry words. But these aminopyralid herbicides, they're herbicides that are designed to not kill grass, but to kill all the broadleaf weeds that you get in grasses. Now, that's stuff we put on our lawn, but this Grazon is something that's used in crops as well. And so think about like wheat, you know, the straw that cows will eat. Well, in order to keep out all of the other weeds, what do? We spray on these herbicides that just don't kill the grass, but kill the weeds. Well, here's the problem. Those herbicides stay on the grasses, even though they don't affect the grasses. And then when animals eat those grasses, they get transferred into the manure. And the thing is that those chemicals don't just go away. They don't get absorbed by the animal in their digestive tract. They stay in the manure. And then we go and we put that manure in our garden. And so what are we doing? We're literally putting weed killer in our garden. And so that's a problem. If you are using manure compost or straw, you're getting this from anywhere that uses these particular herbicides, then you could be poisoning your own plants. Now, there's a way that we can test for this. The way that everybody says to test for it, there probably are some kind of chemical tests we could run. I haven't found one yet, but we'll keep searching. But the main way that people test this is they actually just plant stuff in the soil that they think may or may not have been tainted, and they see what happens. We've essentially run that experiment here. Now, it's not a perfect experiment because I didn't put new manure this year in all of the beds. There's some places where I didn't put it, which is probably why the pumpkins are doing okay in this front bed, but not in the back one that I showed you where they're all still tiny, even though we planted them at the same time. This front bed didn't get any or almost no new manure this year, but that back bed definitely did. And basically everything else here did, except I don't think I added any to the pots, which makes sense since the tomatoes are doing okay. And I didn't add any to these pots over here. In fact, half of the things in here are volunteers from last year. And then the other half is stuff that we just added to them, and these will start flowering soon. My wife likes growing some flowers she can cut. So we have like carnations and stuff that she can just cut off and put in a vase, which is pretty cool. Anyway, so back to the garden and the experiment. So one thing that we can do is we can see what grew and what didn't. We've got some lettuce. It's not doing great, but it's actually growing. That's a little bit telling. We've got carrots. They're not doing amazing, but they're growing. But look at what's prolific, the onions. From what I was able to find, onions are not really affected by this. They're not a broadleaf, and they're just unaffected by Grazon, and so it kind of makes sense. Now, a lot of times things will grow in Grazon infested soil, but you're gonna see some telltale signs. Now, I've got some of these sweet peas back here, and these are not showing the telltale sign. That could be because they're right on the edge of the bed, and so when I mixed in the compost, if I didn't get it all the way to the edges, that might make sense. But let's go look at these peppers. This kind of crinkling up of the leaves, that's one of the signs, an indicator of aminopyralids. Now, it's not terrible, but it is happening quite a bit on a lot of these plants. Look at here, see that? Now, it's hard to know for sure because see how on this one and this one, we're getting quite a bit of that curling, and we're getting some of that on all of these, but honestly, these don't look too terribly bad. I've also read that lettuce isn't supposed to be heavily impacted by this, and yet only half of the lettuce plants that we grew. Now, I guess it's not lettuce, it was like spinach and stuff that's supposed to be less impacted. And honestly, all the lettuces and stuff that I've got here, half of them are doing fine, and the other half, well, they just didn't grow at all. So I don't know if the Grazon is responsible for that or not. I don't know, I would expect that it would impact lettuce. Same thing here. You know, we had kind of stunted growth here on these pumpkins, but I'm not seeing any other signs in these plants that actually did grow. I'm not seeing other signs. So it's not like totally definitive that this is what's going on. Realistically, that compost makes up a small percentage of the soil mixture that's in each of these. I already had a lot of compost from previous years, and other things that are mixed into this soil mixture that we have in our garden beds. And so it could just be that it's having an impact, but not as much impact. And it could also be that whatever herbicide that I got, whether it's specifically Grazon or something else, it could be that it did a better job of preventing germination than it's doing. It could be that the plants that actually germinated are more resilient to it. I don't know. But for some reason, we had a really low percentage of germination this year, very low rate of germination. And we have garden beds where one with these sunflowers is doing amazing and the one next to it is doing very poorly with the exact same seeds. And the only thing I can think of is that I didn't put the same amount or even the same bag of compost in one that I put in the other. They're the same brand, but if they're not from the same bag and one's tainted and one's not, that could be it too. Which makes this a little bit frustrating because it's not a perfect experiment. But we're gonna do what we can to try to remediate this Grazon or these aminopuralids, whether or not that's what's causing the problem this year, and make sure that our soil is in good shape for future years. So what are we gonna do about it? Well, step one is we can give it time. You see, Grazon and all of these aminopuralids, they do have a half-life. They will, one, they can just kind of leach down into the dirt underneath and kind of dissipate over time. And two, they will lose their potency. In fact, on this website that actually sells Grazon, they're advertising it. They talk about how this can be, this can have an impact on the weeds and help prevent weeds from growing for up to 2 years. It's not a good thing when what it is that I want to grow isn't actually weeds, it's my garden. But if you think about it, that was probably originally sprayed onto grasses quite a while ago. Then it was fed through cows, and then it was composted, and then it got to me. And so over time, I would expect it to dissipate, and I probably just don't have super high levels of it right now. The second thing I can do, though, is I can plant things that can help to remove it faster. That's actually one of the reasons why we decided to go with so many sunflowers. We wanted sunflowers for our chickens, and my wife likes them. They're super pretty. So a couple of reasons, but also the sunflower itself is unimpacted by the Grazon, and it actually like draws it up. Now I say it's unimpacted. I literally have a whole garden bed where almost none of my seeds germinated and the other one they did. So whatever herbicide I got, apparently it impacts the germination. But the sunflowers themselves, once they sprouted, seem to be growing just fine. So what we've done is we've actually transplanted a few into that other garden bed. And I think I'm gonna just transplant more so I can get as many sunflowers in that one as possible and probably move some into here and any of these garden beds that are just not performing very well. So time, sunflowers. And then the third thing is I could turn over the soil. Exposing it to the sunlight can help to break that down a bit and do it a little bit more quickly. So I could just kind of turn the soil, but any of these that actually do have anything growing in them, obviously I can't do that during the growing season. In the meantime, what do I do? Well, one of the things I could do is I could plant more of things that are less impacted. I could just plant more onions. I could plant and just do a good job of tending to what I have. But a lot of those things that I would maybe plant to these, it's getting pretty late in the year to start planting them. So I could just hold off and plan to do a fall crop. Maybe by then I'll be able to grow some broccoli or something and do some more lettuce. Honestly, it's already getting super hot for the lettuce that we have. So it's probably not gonna work out very well for us right now. But I could just hold off and just plan to make good use of my garden this fall. And before I plant that fall crop, I could come in and I could amend the soil with some just additional stuff. I have some topsoil I could add to kind of mix in, just so that the amount of compost kind of as a percentage is less, and therefore the amount of Grazon. Also by then, the herbicide, whatever it is that's tainted my soil, will have dissipated a little more by then. So I'm gonna have better luck with that with a fall crop. And then next spring, I'll make sure I turn over the soil. I'm not gonna add new manure compost. I'm only gonna add organic compost from my compost bin, which a lot of it comes from these chickens. And hopefully they're not eating stuff that's tainted with Grazon, because that could be just as bad. But we're just gonna do what we can to make sure we know where our compost is coming from and then take precautions the best we can. I've seen, there's a really, really good video that was put out a few years ago. I'm gonna link to it below. In fact, I'll put a little card to it right here. It's not mine. But it was put together with a lot of really good research and honestly a lot of steps to prevent this herbicide poisoning from happening to your garden, even if you end up getting manure that has that. And so I encourage you to go check out that video if this is something you're concerned about. Honestly, it's something that as gardeners we should be aware of if we're using any sort of organic compost, just because you never know what the real source of that is. If it's truly from an organic source, you could suspect that it's from places where they didn't use herbicides, at least ones that aren't listed as organic friendly. The problem is that the manure may be organic, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the grass that the cows grazed on was all necessarily organically farmed, if that makes sense. Now, I'm not a super it's gotta be organic kind of person, but when it comes to getting good compost for our garden, we wanna make sure it's coming from a source that's not going to poison our plants. So learn up on this a little bit, and in that video, he's gonna show you what you can do with your compost to prepare it before you actually put it in, so that you make sure that you basically just don't have any impact from these herbicides by the time you actually use it in planting. It's not gonna work for everybody, especially if you have a limited space like we do here, but for somebody that has a little more space, those methods are gonna work just fine. So I encourage you to check that out, and I encourage you to subscribe to this channel, because we're talking about all things preparedness. Gardening is one piece of that, but there's a lot that goes into making sure that you're prepared and self-reliant, so that no matter what happens, you're not dependent on government or anybody else. So we'll see you on our next video.